Okay. Now remember that what's happening on the ground, this is going to probably make a bit more sense now that you've done some reading and you've had a more, yeah, is that these bombs arrive completely out of the blue. So, you're walking along the paddy with your ox or your water buffalo, and bombs start dropping. And there is nowhere to be safe. If you're near a bunker, maybe you can get underground, but you're just as likely to be buried in earth if you get underground. If you take a direct strike, you're not going to survive it anyway. So the problem with staying out and standing around, and this is why you don't stand around, is that they're dropping anti-personnel mines or anti-personnel shells. So you remember I discussed these anti-personnel shells where they inside there it's packed with a hive of basically of BBs. Well, actually ball bearings that are like this, and the ball bearings burst out and go at the speed of sound. So they're traveling roughly 700 miles an hour, and they just eliminate everything that's in their path. So you do not want to be. So if you see a bomb drop and you actually survive it, then you're going to get on the ground and hope that you're not near a hit and that you don't get burned, that you're not dropping napalm and so on. Right. So these bombers, which are extremely complex, had radar defeating technology on board. They were at the time in all, between the Arclight strikes and other bombing campaigns, as well as the daily bombing runs in support of ground troops, the military dropped 7 million tons, which is like dropping. And again, I always think of this. It's easy if for me, it's like, well, what is a ton, right? Well, a car is probably a ton. It's about 2,000 pounds, roughly. They're somewhat lighter, but anyway, if it's fully loaded, it's a SUV, it's probably 2,000 pounds. So if you think about this, like dropping 5 to 6 million cars on Vietnam, except when these cars drop, they blow up and they scatter hot, burning tar over everybody and so on, which is more than twice everything that was dropped on Europe and Asia during World War II, excluding the atomic weapons, right? So when you look at the size of Vietnam, so look down at little Vietnam here and consider that everything that was dropped in World War II was dropped on Vietnam. Another old weapon that the US brought to Vietnam was napalm, and I've been talking about this, produced by Dow Chemical. And you may find that name familiar. I mentioned it before probably because of Dow Corning. Corningware, glass, they make, they apart from other things, a number of other things, they all make household items. So Dow Chemical actually makes, they used to make what was called stretch and seal, some kind of basically plastic wrap, cling film, whatever you might call it. But Dow Corning is famous because they made breast implants, because it's another chemical substance which leaked, and that killed a lot of people or gave a lot of people cancer. And then later on, Dow and Monsanto hooked up. There are often collaborations between these massive corporations because they don't want to get into a war. They don't want to get into a fight over a market. As I mentioned before, napalm is jellied gasoline, and it's put into bombs, and the bombs drop, and the jelly splatters all over everything. It's then ignited. It burns at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit. Water won't extinguish it. It has to be put out by chemicals and so on. And it also, as I say, sucks the air out of the surrounding region because it's so hot, and it burns with such intensity that it basically just burns up all the oxygen. So people die of suffocation nearby. They may not be burned to death, but they may die of suffocation. And if you actually see a napalm strike, I mean, I hope you never see a napalm strike in person, obviously. But if you see footage of a real napalm strike, you'll hear a sort of screaming sound. And the screaming is not people screaming; it's the air which is being sucked up into the stratosphere, basically, because there's no air, and so there's this screaming. There's air is screaming into the vacuum, which is it's very spooky. no pun intended. There also may be this sudden vacuum, which if you're close enough to it and you don't get burned, may blind you, rupture your brain, may deafen you, I mean, permanently blow out your eardrums, may kill you, and so on. One of the last older weapons is white phosphorus, which I talked about, Willie Peter, WP, and the veterans, the combat veterans, combat soldiers would say, Willie Peter, make you a believer, because basically it convinces you that you're a believer if you get killed. Basically, you're a true believer because the Americans have brought their justice to Vietnam. So these troops who are pretty much in a permanent state of terror and rage. Well, the terror brings about the rage, right? I mean, you're terrified, you get angry, and so on. This material, white phosphorus, is still used in tracer rounds, which shows you where a gun is firing. So if you remember the little tiny snippet I had from Spooky, which was the plane, the C-47, yeah, that's now been massively upgunned to an AC-130 gunship. But you'll see the Gatling guns, and this what appears to be a string of light going out from the gun. It's because every fifth round it lights up and it catches on fire basically as it's going out there. The reason for that is so you can tell where you're pointing the fire, because you have to know, it's like, where is the gun aiming? So every fifth round is full of white phosphorus. White phosphorus is called a thermobaric weapon, which is similar to napalm. It's a lot of the same effects. It also burns so hot that it just sucks up the oxygen, burns up the oxygen when it explodes. And this is why white phosphorus is used to clear tunnels, because if you throw one of these grenades into a tunnel, it's going to suck out all the oxygen and kill whoever's inside, whether or not the actual fragments from the grenade kill the person. This a sudden vacuum will do it. White phosphorus, however, is, as I mentioned the first time I talked about this, enormously, I mean, these weapons are all horrible. It burns at 5,000 degrees Fahrenheit, and it actually will burn right through. If it sticks to the skin, which is fairly common, that's it for that limb, whatever it is. Or if it sticks to your chest or something like that, it'll just burn through your body. And it can only be put out with chemical extinguishers. So if somebody's got, say, white phosphorus on them and you think, oh, I'll plunge them in a lake, it's like, or a rice paddy, it's like, don't bother, because this stuff is so hot. It'll just boil the water. I mean, it's burning at 5,000 degrees. So water is going to put that out. What you need is a chemical retardant, or you need something which is going to cut off the oxygen to the thing. It still may go on burning though. Okay, so these are the old weapons.